How's everybody going? Armor Studio NYC, and today we're going to be finishing the Tamiya 135 KV1 that we've been working on for the past few weeks. As always, we're going to start with our Tamiya grime to really add some contrast. If you've seen some of the other videos on my channel, you notice that this is a crucial staple in, well, not modeling, plastic modeling, but in my personal preference, I enjoy this step with almost every model. I think it really breaks up each panel line. I think it adds a lot of definition to some recessed parts, maybe that you won't really pay attention to or that might go unnoticed. But this step really just enhances the model. It breaks it up and it gives you different real viewpoints to view the model in an interesting way. For this incredible detailing, we're going to be using our Harder and Steenbeck CR Plus. It's a 0.15 millimeter nozzle, and I just used the air pressure at about 20 psi, and I'm able to really get some really fine detail. I will be making an airbrush tutorial video, maybe for a beginner, intermediate, and maybe an expert. Should expect that video sometime relatively soon. But with this airbrush, we're just able to really get these fine details on each panel line with no overspray, and we're able to cover each one of these rivets that we have here without a lot of overspray, which helps because this is a portion of the model that isn't typically weathered, so we don't have to have a lot of cleanup, and we don't need to hide it with any clever weathering either. For this step, we just really want to take our time and make sure that we get a lot of the details. As for all of them, well, you'd spend a lot of time on the bench, time that I don't necessarily have the luxury of. However, this is a fairly quick and painless process, so you can kind of afford to hit all of those details. As long as you have a good airbrush, good air pressure, properly thinned paint, you won't have to do a lot of cleanup, which is very important when it comes to this step. And this is what it looks like when it is completely contrasted. It does look pretty good, but I will say these decals here are very white, and we weren't able to change them with the post shading, so we're just going to cover it in a little bit of this Tamiya grime. If you notice, I'm a little bit further away from the model here, and we're just making very light passes over this. We don't want to cover it completely, but we just want to kind of tone down the amount of white that we had for those decals. And we just want to continue this method throughout the entirety of the tank. It would look really weird if we had our turret nice and contrasted, but then the rest of the tank would not be. So really want to get into these areas as well. This front fascia here is pretty much a focal point of this tank. Usually with armored vehicles, the front typically looks very menacing, very mean, and it grabs a lot of attention for the viewer. So it's one of those places that you really want to pay a lot of attention, especially since in this specific tank, we removed the front fenders in one of our previous videos. And we also were able to wrap those tow cables around the light fixtures, and in interesting ways that draw the viewer's attention. Again, you really just want to continue this throughout the entire model. It brings it more uniform while being able to separate the model in an interesting way. Moving on, you want to also make sure you get the road wheels completed as well, because I mean, these parts do get dirty as well. Although this will get covered up with a decent amount of weathering. We're not going to go overboard this time like we did on our last Panzer II, but we still need that detail there for when the weathering does its job and becomes not inaccurate, but imperfect, and these places are still showing. We would still want a lot of detail showed in places where weathering does not cover. And this is what our model tank looks like after it is completely contrasted. You can go back to the previous video and kind of compare and contrast. See what I did there? When you have this model contrasted to when you don't have it contrasted. I just think that, for me personally, I think this looks pretty good. Okay, so now it's time to rust all of those metal parts that we had went to do prior. Now, as you can see, I kind of got a head start already, and it kind of looks a little bit ridiculous because it looks like we're just throwing orange paint onto a green tank, which, I'll be honest, looks really strange. But the color's a little bit more subdued in real life. And also we're going to modify them after we're laying down some pretty much base rust tones. So I promise you it will not remain orange, and you're going to see why in a minute. So with a lot of the exposed weld seams, we just took some gunmetal and we dry brushed it over, and it created this really cool effect where in certain light it looks like bare metal, and then as you shift it you get some of those really subdued rust tones. We also added some rust tone variations to the exhaust as well as the tow cables, but this is the first time I tried this method and I think it worked pretty good. So in terms of weld beams, or weld seams rather, it's something that you don't typically see on modern tanks. It's more like World War II Russian tanks because they're very crudely built, but it's something that you may want to implement. And here's some more gratuitous shots of after some rust tones, various rust tones. As I progress, I will continue to add rust tones maybe on chipped paint, and that's something that I will have to work on going forward. Now it's time to, as I like to say, completely destroy the tank by adding sediment pigment paint onto this model here. So as always, we're going to use our little test strip at the bottom here because it's always nice and hidden, but it's also realistic because this is where mud does accumulate. And for this, we're going to go with a kind of muddy, but not really super muddy like the Panzer II. We're just going to kind of aim for that middle portion there is what we kind of want to go for. So thankfully with this KV1 we have a lot of working space. Typically you would want to use this style of weathering prior to adding on the road wheels and such, but I kind of found for me this is a little bit easier. Plus it's very unfortunate when I do really good work in the suspension area for it to just be covered up by road wheels and tracks. So thankfully there was a lot of working space and we were able to really push through with a lot of this weathering that we have here. Again, the beauty, since this is water based, we could just take some water and we can blend in that pretty harsh line of textured mud that we have there. So we're just going to take a smaller brush because we do want this to be a little bit more controlled, and we're just going to really manipulate the edges of this weathering in a way where it makes sense and in a way that we're totally comfortable with. So we take our brush and we brush it in a vertical pattern, so that way we have, let's say, gravity make some mud slide down the inner parts here and collect on the bottom. I think this is a pretty good staple in modeling when it comes to weathering a tank. I think it's pretty good. So in our Panzer II model video, we covered the road wheels in this muddy paste. Here, not so much. We're just going to focus on the exterior, places where the mud would really accumulate, and we're going to do that for every road wheel. Also, as contrast to some of our other videos, instead of dirt, we're going to use some gravelly concrete mix that we've had in our backyard for a while. And I kind of wanted to do this as if, you know, if there were explosions around the tank, bigger chunks of earth would settle on the tank, and then they would settle into these recessed corners, kind of just because of gravity and G-forces and tank driving over certain terrains. It wouldn't really settle right in the middle. It's going to find a place to settle in corners. So that's what we are aiming for here. I already kind of got started, but I'll show you guys the rest of the process. So you just want to take a few small pebbles and you want to differentiate the size of some of the sediment that we have on the tank, being that it's exposed, exploded earth. We're going to fix this with our VMS sand and ballast freeze because it's very good. Now it's time to add a little bit of additional weathering. I'm going to use a dry seaball grass, very cool. For color, we're going to use fresh mud, panel line accent color by Tamiya, and we're also going to use earth, which the label kind of has gotten destroyed there. And after we're done fixing our dry seaball grass to our mud with our VMS ballast freeze, we're going to add some more colors. So this is fresh mud. We kind of wanted to go with darker colored mud than previous videos. That's why we're using fresh mud, and that's why we're also using the black panel liner. We're gonna wet blend all of these together, so that way we have a nice different color for this tank, because it's all about making things different at the end of the day. Now this is a very easy step. It may be intimidating to someone who isn't used to weathering a model, but I promise you it's not hard, and just by following these very simple steps, you too can achieve this look for your model. We want to wet blend the black with the brown because, well, we blend it instead of having a harsh black layer of paint on top of a drier layer of paint. Add a little bit of speckling, as you saw in the back there, guys, and this model is complete. It's been quite the journey with this one. We've had to implement some things that we usually wouldn't do, as in tearing the model apart and sawing pieces off of the model. But this was an absolute blast to build, especially after you weather everything completely. It really comes together really quick. We turned our green box, because that's exactly what it looked like, into this nicely weathered tank. Not over the top, not too little. It's just enough where you really get that really accurate and impressive weathering technique on there. So the rust tones still do look a little bit on the bright side for especially those tow cables, but it must just be the lighting, because it doesn't appear that way at all in real life. If you guys like this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And I know I missed a video last week, but you know, adulting, right? Anyway, guys, there will be a new video next week as I start a new project. Keep tuned, and I'll see you guys later.